Right now, I want to introduce our next speaker. She's a colleague. I've worked with her. In fact, I've worked with all the speakers today. They are colleagues, they are comrades, they are friends, they are family. It's Linzi Louise. She's a senior researcher and advocacy officer at the African Center for Biodiversity. Among many other experiences, she has a strong background in forests and livelihoods and in agricultural developments. She's driven by the need for social and environmental justice and works between the arts and sciences for meaningful and sustainable behavior change in our food systems. She'll be speaking to us today on stories of seed. I like stories. I mean, our food is all about stories. Africa is all about stories. We tell stories. So she's going to tell one of those stories, and it's going to be on seeds. That's the bedrock of everything. Seeds, that is where it all starts from. That is what they want to call it. Seeds, laws, economics, and market challenges in the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 era. Ladies, gentlemen, friends, gentlemen, forests, biodiversity, waters, rivers. Let's give it up for Linzi. Welcome, Linzi. It's over to you.
Hi. Thanks, Marianne, and thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And yeah, so I'm going to be attempting to talk to you about the stories of seed. And of course, I'd like it to be more of a storytelling, but it's about laws and about the markets. And so it might not be such a grand story, and maybe someone else can also add to it as well. But yeah, I also need to say that I was quite upset because I saw that in our chat it was also hacked, and I think that there's a lot of people who are very scared of Africa uniting its voice and coming out with a strong voice. So I think that these discussions are really important now, and we need to stand together at these times. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you to the presenters before, because I think you've set a great base for me to discuss seed systems in Africa. And so I'm just going to give you a bit of a background for those who might not be so aware. It has definitely been discussed around our seed systems in Africa as part, of course, of our food systems. Just a little bit of a background. And we know it's been discussed that there are many different sources of seed. There's from the own stocks, social networks, seed fairs, local markets. It also comes through other sources such as agro dealers, through NGOs, distribution of seeds. And often these are described as either formal or farmer managed seed systems. And these are some pictures to show you, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with these different scenes. But also just to acknowledge that our agricultural biodiversity is formed through this beautiful relationship between farmers in the environment. And it's been the base through farmer selection and natural selection over the last 10,000 years that we have all of our crop diversity that we have today. And these very beautiful and spiritual connections that we have with our land. And this has been recognized by what's called the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which recognizes this historical but also current role of smallholder farmers in breeding, in developing and conserving our agricultural biodiversity. And this has given rise to what's called farmers' rights. And farmers' rights is about the right of farmers to save, reuse, and exchange and sell seed. Now, of course, that might sound very obvious because that's the base of our civilization. But in actual fact, we find that this gets imposed upon, and these rights are actually not necessarily being realized in most cases. So also, it's been discussed a little bit here, but just to also give you some figures. In Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, up to 90% of our seed comes from farmer-managed seed systems. And I've crossed out here intentionally what is often described, and you'll see throughout all your documents or all documents on seed trade, is what's called the informal seed sector. And while I'm also an advocate for informality, this is actually used mostly to undermine and denigrate the system that supports all of our food production. So I've crossed that out, and it's not how we describe them as farmer managed seed systems. And actually in Nigeria, less than 15% of seed that farmers used is coming from your formal sector, what's called modern varieties. And again, I've crossed out their quality seed of improved varieties, because this is also a misnomer, because farmer seed is often of very high quality, and this concept of improved seed is very problematic and again undermines farmer seed. So we use the term modern varieties instead. So our farmer seed systems is really, as I've described, is the saving, reusing, the exchange and sale of seed, often from one system to another, one season to another. It's based on local, genetically diverse, adaptable and affordable seed. Of course, this is quite different, and I'm not going to go into detail on this, but it's very different from what we know as modern breeding and modern agriculture and industrial agricultural practices, which emerged in the 1900s and based on able to utilize the natural concept of hybridization for specific outcomes, specific characteristics of your seed. And mostly this is for yield and productivity. It's really the only indicators that people seem to have in mind, while there's a whole range of other indicators that we need, such as nutrition. There's a range that I'll speak about a bit later. And of course, these types of varieties are really embedded within this concept of modern and industrial agricultural practices, which rely often on synthetic fertilizers and other agrochemicals. And this concept of inheritance and the inheriting of genes is what has brought us to this concept of genetic engineering, which again, I'm not going to speak about in a lot of detail, but it's this narrow view of how things work, very limited and linear, when actually we know that genetics, the genome, it's an ecology and everything functions as an ecosystem and it interacts with its environment. So, okay, let's also then we're going to talk a bit about seed laws, plant variety protection, and farmers' rights in the context of farmers' rights. In Nigeria, there's this national roadmap, national seed roadmap, as I'm sure many of you might be aware of. But in many ways, it's not unique to other places on the continent. I'm based in South Africa, just by the way. And so these are not unique. The orientation of seed laws is specifically towards the formal sector, as I've described to you, this high performance seed sector. In Nigeria, there's the Seed Act, the Seed Council Act, and these govern what's considered the formal seed sector around the registration, the release, and the certification of seeds. And often this is what's required to sell seed at all. In most cases, it's actually illegal to sell seed that's not on some sort of register. What's interesting about this law actually is it does actually mention that domestic varieties, as you see in informal seed systems, actually are allowed to be registered under some different sort of system. And I think it's quite an interesting thing to look more into. But the issue still remains that our formal seed sector gets priority, yet farmers don't even rely on that seed system. So this is really private sector focused. It's orientated towards industrial agriculture, which is orientated towards a monocropping system, as it's spoken about earlier. And to fast track this quality seed trade, which undermines farmers' seed system, which we all rely on. So, and you can see it here in the National Seed Roadmap, where it says informal markets are currently the most important source of seed. So it recognizes it, but then it also says, but the seed is no different to that of grain, which creates this artificial divide between seed and grain, and really saying that farmer seed is of poor quality, which of course, there's no quality control system, but that's just not the truth. And it is the base of all food and food security. So this is some of the institutions that are in the formal seed sector in Nigeria, and I'm not going to go into detail about it. But you can just see that in all elements, the process and the orientation is to get formal corporate seed to smallholder farmers through different sorts of systems. They're calling it integrated seed sector, but that's the base of what people are trying to do. And as you can see here, our father, Nima Basti, he's been advocating, specifically for the rights of farmers and what's called under plant variety protection. And this is a very important aspect of the corporate architecture of our seed systems and of the push towards certain types of seed systems. And under what's called UPOV 1991, which really supports the private intellectual property rights over seed. And Nigeria actually is in a very interesting position where it's not a member of OAPI, and OAPI is a signatory actually of UPOV 1991, which is a very, very problematic system undermining farmers and farmers' rights in their seed systems. So it's very interesting, and this discussion has been ongoing. In terms of the harmonization of seed laws, and this is important, I've mentioned OAPI, but that's specifically on plant variety protection. But then there's the sea trade regulations of ECOWAS, which Nigeria is a member of. And then there's the biosafety regulations that's of ECOWAS that is trying to be promoted at the moment, which we need to be very cautious of. But what is very interesting is that the biotech push in Nigeria is very strong, and it's very concerning. We know that BT cotton, and I'm also not going to go into too much detail on this, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. But BT cotton has already been approved for environmental release. But that is often the case where cotton is approved first. But what is really, really concerning is there's the fact that Nigeria is the first country to approve for the environmental release of BT cowpea. Now, Africa is the center of origin and the center of diversity of cowpea. It is a food security crop. It is a woman's crop. It is an essential crop for our continent. And now it's being exposed to genetically modified interference. And this is a whole other discussion, but it's very concerning. And what's also very interesting is that the biosafety law of Nigeria has been expanded to facilitate the entry of new and risky and very controversial genetically engineered new technologies. So these are just things I'm just putting out there because I think they're important for us to just understand from a framework. What's very important in all of this is to understand that it is smallholder farmers that feed the continent, generally. South Africa potentially is a bit of a different case, but the rest of the continent, this is known. It was mentioned earlier, 80% of our food. So, the question is, who will feed people in the future and on this continent? And we know for a fact this will be smallholder farmers. And these technologies, these laws are completely orientated to the benefit of the private sector, large-scale farmers, to for sure putting smallholder farmers and smallholder farming systems more at risk. And we've already been speaking about the direct link between industrial agriculture and the climate crisis and ecosystem crises and the ecosystem collapse that we're facing. Of course, we know that COVID and the linkages with zoonotic diseases. And this has been predicted since, this report speaks about it around the encroachment on natural habitats and the need to preserve them, specifically around the issues of pandemics. And even beyond that, if you look at this is around planetary boundaries. Besides climate change and many of the concerns that we really need to be concerned about, if you look at this, we've already far exceeded issues directly related to industrial agriculture, the loss of genetic diversity, and also the imbalances in our nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. These are out there, people know about it, but nothing doesn't even get discussed. Nobody speaks about it. So industrial agriculture and the model that is being promoted is highly, highly problematic. And what are the implications for us and for smallholder farmers that we work with, and also for our food systems and our food security? Well, firstly, we know that there is a push to transform the biodiverse mixed cropping systems in Africa towards monocropping systems. This creates high vulnerability. So when there are shocks, when there are pests, when there are diseases, it can take out everything. This creates vulnerability. There is impacts on biodiversity, on agricultural biodiversity, and also on biodiversity more broadly. There are many reports on this. The IPES report is one of the most well-known that really speaks to that. For farmers specifically, we know that there's an increase in dependency when you start to promote these sorts of seeds and technologies, increasingly expensive inputs, dependency on input supply chains, and dependency on external markets, because these sorts of farming practices are geared completely towards export. So what does that mean for local food security? And of course, there's a technological lock-in because the fertilizers, the types of seed, the chemicals, they're all associated. So, and a lot of this is being pushed through farmer support programs by government. And I think what's really scary at this time, and we know that it is corporate and industrial agriculture that has caused so many of these problems, they don't take responsibility for these issues. And rather, at this time, we see people intensifying and justifying further promotion of these technologies. We were part of the SADC meeting, and it's the same, it's business as usual. So despite this seismic crisis that we face, this is what we're experiencing. And these are really and truly false solutions to the issues, to these systemic issues that we're facing. So in terms of what's happening right now during COVID, of course, we're still in early days actually in Africa, and we're still waiting to see. And unfortunately in South Africa, the hospitals are at their maximum. So we're reaching that point now. But across the continent, you know, there's been lockdowns, there's been social distancing. What has the impact been on markets? As it's been said, there's been a limit to farmers who have produce being able to take their produce to market. So there's been this emergence of satellite markets. But still, it remains the fact that the local supply, local food systems, where they exist, people have access to food and affordable food. But what has been the impact on supply chains? When you have long distance supply chains, the availability has been disrupted. If you're dependent on inputs to come in, they've been delayed. Increase in prices of inputs, increase in prices of food. The system is so vulnerable.
Start to round up, please.
Okay, I'm trying my best. Okay. So then I think the main point is there's been serious fractures that expose the dependencies and the vulnerabilities of our food and agricultural systems. And we really need to think about the future of our seed and food systems in Africa, the trajectory that we're taking, and especially as youth on the continent. So when we're looking forward into shifting policies and practices, as it's been mentioned, but I think the point has to be really strong, that we need decorporatized, decentralized, and decolonized food systems. There is the dependency, the oppression, and the extractive nature of our systems is still being promoted. People are using this as an opportunity still to push these things. So I'd also like to be positive, but I also think that we cannot be complacent. You see this through our seed systems, through agricultural policies, through trade deals that are going on, which are shifting all our policies and our laws. There has to be a focus on smallholder farmers, on women, and on youth to innovate. These are the historical innovators. We need to focus on regenerative, restorative agriculture, and agriculture that nourishes and sustains us. And this is key, is the biodiverse agroecological systems and food sovereignty. We need to be understanding and looking at what does this mean. So I won't go into too much detail, but there's a lot written on this, but I also think that we need to be thinking new. Things have changed, and we do need to use this as an opportunity, this pivotal moment in time, to really direct to the future that we want. So just to look forward, and this is my final slide, you know, the question does remain though, how do we put some of this in practice? And we do need to be strong and unified on this. What is our responsibility, and what is actually our ability to respond to these future shocks and increase our resilience? And how do we come together to restore the integrity of African food, seed, agricultural systems, and social and cultural ecosystems? And I think these are very important questions for us to ask ourselves as the NGO sector, as youth on the continent, as activists. So yeah, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today.